Howard Nations from Houston is just a legend in AAJ and among trial lawyers nationally. But one thing you may not know about him was that before he became a trial lawyer, and before he became known and loved by all of us, he was a Russian linguist in the Army during the Cold War. And I'm not sure where that carries through to the development of the skills that he has developed in such legendary degree. In his 50-year career, Howard Nations has been a pioneer in courtroom technology, a pioneer in forensic psychology in the courtroom, in the neuro-linguistic principles in the courtroom. He has been president of darn near every organization he has been a member of, including the Texas Bar and the Texas Trial Lawyers and numerous other organizations. 2 years ago, he was awarded the AAJ Lifetime Achievement Award, which kind of sums it all up. I'm going to get out of the way and let Howard talk on Know Your Audience, presenting damages to the millennial demographic.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm going to talk about a wonderful group called the Millennials. And the Millennials are a very, very unique group politically. They're a unique group every way you can imagine, and they are very definitely different as jurors. They approach things as jurors very, very differently from their predecessors, their older siblings, which is Generation X. And so I started studying the Millennials when they got old enough to be jurors. And I've been studying them pretty closely ever since. And you can see, I got a call from the Clinton campaign because I've been speaking on this subject for about 15 years now. And I got a call from the Clinton campaign, and they were asking if I could give them some advice on how Hillary could reach the millennials, because you may have seen the stats that with the millennials, Hillary is down on the downside of an 85-15 split. Bernie's got 85% of the millennials. And so I said, well, you don't need me, just watch Bernie, because he's doing it right, and he is. He's doing it on every level absolutely right, and he's connecting with the millennials. 85%, that's an incredible figure for any demographic. So they are different, and I'm going to talk to you very quickly today about the topic of how we approach them on the subject of damages. So let's talk about them generally first. How do we get millennials to focus on anything, but especially on our evidence? You have to understand their motivations, and it's you have to use show and tell more than any demographic group we've ever seen. The millennials are more about the show part of show and tell because they are extremely visual. So we have to use standard focus techniques in order to do that. We talk about theming. So we have to have a visual theme that is best supported by an actual graphic, something they can take into the jury room and look at, something that you can tie into your closing argument when you make an argument to them. So we're not just to have a theme like profit over safety, the standard themes that we've had for years. Just a word theme doesn't resonate nearly as well with the millennials as a theme that you can tie into a picture. If your theme, one of my themes in damages is that the plaintiff is doing the best they can with what they have left. And we never, ever stress sympathy. We never go for sympathy in trying to prove damages, because that just plays right into the model, the bad model, the tort reform model of trial lawyers. Instead of pleading for sympathy, what we always go for is courage. Courage, the very best, doing the best they can with what they have left. And this is a visual frame for courage. Here's a young man who's a paraplegic. It was a forklift rollover. He's 18 years old, working a job between high school and starting college in the fall, and he gets in a forklift rollover accident, ends up paraplegic. Well, he didn't sit around and cry about it. He's doing the best he can. I didn't pose this picture. I went over and spent a day with this young guy, terrific kid. I went over and spent a day with him. I said, "You go through your regular routine, and let me figure out what to do." And when I saw him doing this, I saw him working out. I thought, boy, that's the picture of doing the best you can with what you have left. I also have some video of him popping wheelies in his wheelchair, but I left that part out. But so let's talk about who are the millennials. They are so distinct that they refuse to be called Generation Y. They started out being Generation Y, but they are the group that graduated high school in the year 2000. So they said, we're launching into a whole new millennium in our careers. So we want to be known as the millennials. So they wouldn't respond to Generation Y. So they were born from 82 to 02, and they are the children of the boomers, and they're the younger siblings of Generation X. So here's the classic stereotype of them, and it's not just a stereotype, it's actually true. 94% of them have cell phones, 76% communicate. Their preferred method of communication is by instant messaging. 92% multitask and messaging. And they regard themselves as being, as living by the iPhone, which they do. I mean, you'll see them sitting across the room from each other, communicating. I was with a group of lawyers. Mass Torts Made Perfect. And I was with, we had one of the cabanas by the pool, and there were a bunch of lawyers out there, and there were a group of about 6 lawyers that were millennials, young millennial lawyers. And so we're sitting out there, and one group over here, guy over here is sitting there, and he starts laughing, and then a second later, a guy over here starts laughing, and then they all start laughing. I realized that they're texting each other, and they're all laughing at their text. But I said, you guys realize you can hear each other, right? but they don't want to. They prefer the texting. They're the second largest population now. There's 75 million of them, and think about that. They are now very, very actively, they're becoming a larger and larger percentage of our juries now. So we really need to talk about how to communicate with them. So an interesting aspect of how to communicate with them is, how do they self-identify? What do they regard themselves? This is interesting. This bodes well for the Democratic Party in the future. They self-identify in testing as more liberal and Democrat, which you're seeing reflected in Bernie's campaign, the more liberal part. But they're more liberal, more Democrat than ever. 50% of them are entering college, which is the largest percentage that we've had in any generation. Now, their unemployment rate. So you're going to talk about how to communicate with them, and you've got a client who was injured, lost their job, and now you're complaining about they can't find a job. Well, you know, it's welcome to my world. They have a 20% unemployment rate, and they're mad about a lot of things, and they're justifiably mad about a lot of things, and we need to understand what those things are and why. So the unemployment rate starts at, they have less health insurance than any other generation. They have the highest rate of obesity. All those school lunches of hot dogs and pizza that we've fed them in our public school system is showing up now. They have the highest rate of obesity, and it's a matter about which their health is a matter about which they're very concerned. They are concerned about their declining health. They're not as healthy as their older siblings, and they are at this age, at the age where they are now, they are our least healthy generation. One of the reasons, of course, is that they're not out running and playing and as kids and doing all the things that we did, and all the activities that we did. You know, a lot of schools have even done away with phys ed class. They don't even have an hour a day of physical education. They're spending their time sitting at computers. All their time is at computers and on iPhones, very little health activity, and then they have this terrible, this brilliant idea of let's feed them hot dogs and pizza at lunch at school every day and get them started off on a fast food diet. And the result of it, declining health and obesity. And to some extent, they're starting to figure out they didn't do this to themselves. This was done to them by who? By the school system, by the government system. So here's something that's very different about them, and this is what Bernie is tapping into. They feel that the federal government should do more. Every government should do more for them. They have an adverse view of business for a very good reason. That reason is what? Student loans. They want to have a job with self-esteem. They're not interested in flipping burgers. They want a job with self-esteem. And they're heavily burdened with school debt. So again, when you start talking, when you have a client who has a lot of debt, maybe from lost time from work as a result of a tragic injury, or they have medical bills, they have wage loss, things of that nature, these people identify, but again, it's welcome to my world. I graduated from college, I can't find a job. This is a standard story. I graduated from college, I can't find a job, and I am now heavily burdened with school debt. I have a school debt from college that is greater than a mortgage on a house I could buy if I could buy a house. And so, and after all that school debt, they can't find a job. So they're understandably upset with the system. They're understandably upset with government, and that's why they think government should be doing more for them. They're understandably, and this is a very important aspect of the millennials, they're understandably very upset with big business. They're very upset with corporate America. They're upset with Wall Street. They're upset with banks because the banks are the ones that they owe this student debt to. And they felt like they've really been trapped in this student debt routine, and actually they have. So this again, think about it. Why is Bernie, what is Bernie's message? Anti-Wall Street, a rigged economic system. It all plays directly into not only their beliefs, but their experience, which of course is what forms their beliefs. So the result is, and this becomes important in damages, is that they don't rebel against their parents. They're living with their parents longer. They have a closer relationship with their parents. The average now for millennials leaving home, they're staying at home with their parents until age 28. So they have a closer relationship with their parents because they're in the next bedroom. They're still right there. This is not the parents' choice, incidentally, but they talk an average of 1.5 times per day on a wide variety of topics with their parents. So if you've got a case involving loss of a parent, loss of a mother, loss of a father, or loss of a family member of any type, you've got a good prospect with your millennial jurors because they have a very tight relationship with their parents. The Generation X was largely the same, except the Generation Y, the millennials, are even more so. So they are, now here's where you get, this is more of a liability issue than a damages issue. They're accepting of authority. They are rules followers. When you think about it, they are the most rigidly rule-folling generation ever. You know, when I was a kid, if we wanted to play football, we'd go out in the field and start tossing the ball around, and other kids would see us, and then they'd come over. Next thing you know, we'd have enough people for a game, so we'd form up our own game. We'd pick sides, and we'd play football. We'd play baseball. We'd play whatever on our own. Now, everything with these kids, I think they organize them in the hospital, in the delivery ward. Everything they do in teams. Everything they do with rules. They are taught rules in everything. And everything they do, the whole idea is we're all one. We're all, you don't want to stand out. One of the things about millennials is they have the book called Everyone Gets a Trophy. So you're not supposed to stand out and be a lot better than everybody else. They don't have the competitive spirit of the boomers. The boomers had a huge competitive spirit, who are the parents of the millennials, have a huge competitive spirit between each other. But these folks are together, they're rules followers, they're the most supervised in history, and they are, as a result of that, you really preach rules to these people. When you're talking about liability, you talk about the violation of a rule, but you don't just talk about it. You show them a rule. You show them the rule, you explain to them the reason for the rule, you explain why the defendant violated the rule, how the defendant violated the rule, and why the rule is important, and that the rule was made to prevent exactly what happened to this plaintiff. You go into details about rules. And if you have a medical protocol, you show that medical protocol in writing. You don't just talk about the medical protocol. You want to show them, you want to stress rules. And you don't want to talk about a medical protocol. You want to talk about this is a rule that doctors follow. This is a rule that doctors are expected to follow, a rule made by the profession, a rule made among the doctors themselves. And so you want to talk heavily about violation of rules, because if you get enough violation of rules, then you get to the point where your liability can drive your damages. Your liability can certainly increase your damages. So the whole issue of rules and there being very strong rules followers is very important, and it plays heavily on both liability and damages. Now, there are more rule followers than any other generation. So if you've got a case where the rules, following the rules is very important, that's going to be maybe outcome determinative in your case, and you're choosing between the boomers and the millennials, the boomers were, this is a generation from the 60s. These are the guys that went out and protested in the streets. They protested civil rights. They protested the Vietnam War. When they were not stoned, they were consciously protesting. When they were stoned, they were unconsciously protesting. So your boomers are a very, very, very different generation than your millennials. And so the attitude about rules is very different among millennials and their parents, the boomers. The Generation X, which fits in the middle there, they're also rules followers, but not nearly as strongly. This generation of millennials, they were born and raised with rules. And so you can't stress rules enough.